There is a specific, agonizing brand of tragedy reserved for a woman who spends 3 decades quietly pouring the concrete for her husband's empire, only to have him decide she is too dull to stand on the balcony once the penthouse is built. For 30 years, I believed that love was synonymous with invisible labor. I was Claire, a brilliant, hyper-focused accountant who had sacrificed a deeply promising corporate career to salvage the chaotic ambitions of my husband, Arthur. When we met, Arthur was nothing more than a charming man with a single, broken-down delivery truck and a mountain of terrifying debt. While he possessed the golden smile and the firm handshake, I possessed the strategic mind that could actually turn a profit. I spent my 20s and 30s in a freezing, poorly lit garage, managing the books, routing the logistics, negotiating with ruthless vendors, and designing the proprietary dispatch software that eventually transformed his single truck into a multi-million-dollar national logistics behemoth. I was the silent engine humming beneath the hood of his success, perfectly content to let him stand in the spotlight and take the applause. I thought we were building a dynasty together, a fortress meant to shelter us in our twilight years. I never suspected that while I was busy securing the foundation of our legacy, he was busy drafting the blueprints for my eviction. But Arthur made a catastrophic miscalculation born of unchecked arrogance. He believed he could quietly discard me, siphon the wealth I had generated, and walk away with a younger model. He completely forgot that the architect who builds the fortress is the only one who knows where the traps are hidden, and I was about to trigger every single one of them. The erosion of our marriage did not happen in a sudden landslide. It was a slow, deliberate chipping away of my presence, entirely correlated with the inflation of his bank accounts. As Apex Logistics crossed the $50 million valuation threshold, the man who used to kiss my forehead in that freezing garage mutated into a stranger. His ego became a bloated, insatiable entity. He began grumbling about my presence in the executive suites, claiming that my conservative financial approach was stifling his visionary growth. He slowly but systematically pushed me out of the corporate structure, insisting that at 58, I had earned the right to rest and should embrace the life of a pampered, stay-at-home wife. I yielded. I was exhausted from 30 years of relentless corporate warfare, and I foolishly believed I had earned a peaceful retirement alongside the man I loved. I stayed home, tending to our sprawling suburban estate, while Arthur spent his days in the towering glass skyscraper I had helped finance. Then came Chloe. She was 28, possessing a master's degree in aggressive networking and the official title of Director of Marketing. She was brought in to revamp the company's public image, but it quickly became apparent that she was primarily focused on revamping Arthur's personal life. She fed him a steady, intoxicating diet of pure adulation, looking at him as if he were a self-made titan of industry, entirely erasing the 30 years of sweat equity I had invested. Arthur, desperate to feel young and virile, drank it in. The late nights at the office turned into emergency weekend retreats. His password changed. His demeanor toward me shifted from dismissive to openly contemptuous. I knew something was wrong, but the absolute confirmation of my obsolescence arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. Arthur had left for a golf retreat in Pebble Beach, leaving behind a chaotic mess in his home study. While organizing his desk, I reached for a thick, unmarked manila folder that had slipped behind a row of heavy reference books. I opened it, expecting tax documents. Instead, I found my own execution order. Sitting on the top of the stack were meticulously drafted divorce petitions. The narrative his lawyers had constructed was nauseating. They framed me as a dependent, historically uninvolved spouse whose primary contribution was domestic upkeep. The proposed settlement was an insulting, flat-rate alimony payout that would effectively deny me any equity in Apex Logistics. But the true heartbreak was buried beneath the legal petitions. There were real estate closing documents and wire transfer receipts for a $4 million beachfront property in Carmel by the Sea. The deed was registered jointly to Arthur and Chloe. I stood in the center of the mahogany-paneled study, the papers trembling in my hands. I didn't collapse. I didn't weep. A strange, glacial calm descended over me, extinguishing the devoted wife and awakening the ruthless accountant who had once navigated us out of bankruptcy. Arthur was planning to blindside me, hand me pennies, and use my life's work to fund a permanent vacation with a woman 30 years my junior. He thought I was just a naive, aging housewife who wouldn't understand the numbers. He was about to learn a terrifying lesson about the danger of underestimating the woman who wrote the ledger. In the world of high finance logistics, the worst thing you can do when you discover an enemy's plan is to let them know you've found it. Emotional confrontations yield nothing but closed doors and shredded evidence. I needed Arthur to remain entirely comfortable, wrapped securely in his delusion of absolute superiority, while I quietly dismantled the very ground he walked on. I carefully placed the divorce petitions and the real estate documents back into the manila folder, sliding it precisely behind the reference books where he had hidden it. When Arthur returned from his golf retreat, his skin tanned and his phone buzzing relentlessly with text messages he would quickly hide, I greeted him with a warm, placid smile. I poured his coffee, asked him about his swing, and played the role of the docile, disconnected wife to terrifying perfection. My absolute lack of suspicion gave him the false confidence to accelerate his plans. He became incredibly sloppy, convinced that I was entirely blind to the corporate world he now ruled. While he was busy playing the Titan by day and the Playboy by night, I resurrected my past. Arthur assumed that, when I stepped down from the day-to-day operations 2 years ago, I had relinquished my digital footprint within the company. He was a charismatic salesman, but he was profoundly ignorant regarding information technology. He forgot that I had personally designed the company's original server architecture and established the primary administrative firewalls. My master credentials were hard-coded into the firm's deepest directories, access codes Arthur didn't even know existed. Night after night, while the house was silent and Arthur was fast asleep, I retreated to the guest room, opened my encrypted laptop, and conducted a silent, devastating forensic audit of Apex Logistics. What I discovered was a staggering web of financial infidelity. Arthur wasn't just using his massive executive salary to fund his affair with Chloe. He was actively and illegally embezzling from the company's Series B investor capital. I tracked a labyrinth of fraudulent vendor invoices for phantom marketing analytics services. Millions of dollars were being systematically siphoned from the corporate operating budget into an offshore shell company. That stolen capital was what had purchased the Carmel Beach House, a fleet of luxury cars, and the diamond jewelry Chloe flaunted on her private social media accounts. It was a textbook case of fiduciary fraud, holding enough legal weight to warrant federal prison time. I documented every wire transfer, every IP log, and every fake invoice, downloading the evidence onto a secure external drive. But exposing his fraud was only half the battle. I didn't just want to punish him, I wanted to entirely repossess the empire he was trying to steal from me. To do that, I had to dig deep into the physical archives. I drove to a secure off-site storage facility where the company's oldest physical records were kept in climate-controlled vaults. I spent 8 hours sifting through decades of yellowing paperwork until I finally found what I was looking for: the original articles of incorporation filed 30 years ago. I sat on the cold concrete floor of the vault, staring at the faded signatures, and a dark, merciless smile spread across my face. When we first started the business, Arthur's credit was completely decimated by a string of failed ventures. To protect the new company from his creditors and to secure our initial business loans, I had legally registered the master holding company, Crestview Holdings, exclusively in my name. Furthermore, the patents for the proprietary routing software that made Apex Logistics a $50 million entity were registered solely to Crestview. Arthur, blinded by decades of public adulation and his own soaring ego, had completely forgotten the corporate structure I had designed to save his life. Apex Logistics was nothing more than a subsidiary, a public-facing shell that leased its software and its branding from my holding company. Arthur wasn't the owner. He wasn't even a partner. Legally, irrevocably, he was simply an employee of a company that belonged entirely to me. Armed with the embezzlement audit and the unassailable foundational documents, I bypassed divorce attorneys altogether and scheduled a covert meeting with a team of the most ruthless corporate litigators in the state. I laid the paperwork across their sprawling conference table. "I don't want a settlement," I told the lead attorney, a razor-sharp woman who looked at the incorporation documents with profound, predatory respect. "I want an execution. I want him terminated for cause, I want the stolen assets recovered, and I want him to walk away with absolutely nothing. Over the next 2 weeks, we prepared the legal guillotine. I continued to smile over breakfast. I continued to ask Arthur how his day was. I watched him preen and boast, utterly oblivious to the fact that the invisible scaffolding he had taken for granted was about to collapse, dropping him from the penthouse straight down to the pavement. The morning of the quarterly shareholder meeting dawned with a heavy, oppressive gray sky, but inside my chest, there was nothing but crystal-clear, unadulterated focus. This was the day Arthur had chosen to launch his grand exit strategy. According to the internal emails I had intercepted, his agenda was meticulously planned. He would stand before the board, officially promote Chloe to vice president of strategy, initiate the sale of a massive block of his founder's shares. And then, returning home that evening a fabulously wealthy, liberated man, he would serve me with the divorce papers. He was dressing for a coronation. He stood in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting the cuffs of a bespoke Italian suit, his chest puffed out with sheer, intoxicating arrogance. "I'll be late tonight, Claire," he said dismissively, not even bothering to meet my eyes in the reflection. "This board meeting is going to change the entire trajectory of my legacy. We're pushing the company into a new era. Have dinner without me." "I hope the meeting gives you exactly what you deserve, Arthur," I replied softly, my voice perfectly neutral. He scoffed, grabbed his leather briefcase, and walked out the door without a second glance. An hour later, I shed the oversized, beige cardigan and the sensible slacks that had comprised my stay-at-home uniform for the past 2 years. I stepped into a fiercely structured, custom-tailored navy blue designer suit. I slipped on a pair of sharp stilettos, applied a bold slash of lipstick, and looked at myself in the mirror. The weary, discarded wife was gone. The architect had returned. I arrived at the towering downtown headquarters of Apex Logistics at 10:15 a.m., exactly 15 minutes after the board meeting had commenced. Flanking me on either side were 4 of the most terrifying corporate litigators in the city, carrying heavy leather briefcases containing Arthur's utter destruction. We bypassed the receptionist, my old security badge granting me immediate, unquestioned access to the executive elevator. Through the frosted glass walls of the master boardroom, I could see the scene perfectly. Arthur was holding court at the head of the massive mahogany table. The room was packed with venture capitalists, senior executives, and key investors. Arthur was pacing confidently, gesturing toward a PowerPoint presentation detailing projected quarterly growth. Seated directly to his right, wearing an entirely inappropriate cocktail dress and a smug, proprietary smile, was Chloe. She was looking at the board members as if she already owned them. I didn't knock. I pushed the heavy double doors open. They hit the stoppers with a thunderous crack that echoed through the room like a gunshot. The entire boardroom went dead silent. Dozens of heads snapped toward the entrance. My legal team stepped in behind me, fanning out with an intimidating, military precision, shutting the doors and effectively sealing the room. Arthur froze mid-stride. His hand, pointing toward the projection screen, slowly lowered. The golden, charismatic smile slid completely off his face, replaced by a look of profound, staggering confusion. He stared at my designer suit, the terrifying lawyers at my back, and the posture of absolute, unyielding authority I commanded. "Claire," Arthur stammered, his voice cracking, the polished CEO instantly reverting to the panicked man I had met 30 years ago. What are you doing here? This is a closed executive session. You need to leave. Now." "I have no intention of leaving, Arthur," I said, my voice cold, steady, and carrying effortlessly to every corner of the room. I walked slowly down the side of the table, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. "Because a new era for this company is exactly what we are here to discuss. Though my agenda differs significantly from yours." "Security," Arthur shouted, his panic breaking through. He pointed a trembling finger at me, looking wildly at the executives. "Someone call security. Get her out of here." "Sit down, Arthur," I commanded, the sheer, icy force of my tone making him flinch. I turned to the lead investors, men and women I had personally secured during the grueling early years of the business. "Ladies and gentlemen, you were brought here today to approve a massive cash-out of founders' shares and to promote the young woman sitting to the CEO's right. Before you vote, there is a piece of vital financial analytics you need to review." I nodded to my lead attorney. He stepped over to the AV console, seamlessly overriding Arthur's presentation laptop with an encrypted USB drive. The screen behind Arthur flared violently. His meaningless growth charts vanished, replaced by the high-definition, meticulously highlighted forensic audit of his offshore shell company. "For the past 14 months, I announced to the captive, horrified audience, the CEO of this firm has been executing a systematic, highly illegal embezzlement campaign. He has utilized fraudulent vendor invoices to siphon over $16 million of your investor capital into a blind offshore trust." I clicked a remote in my hand. The screen shifted to display the wire transfer receipts, the deed to the $4 million Carmel Beach house, and the title registrations for 3 luxury vehicles, all bearing the name of Chloe, the proposed vice president of strategy. A collective, sharp gasp swept through the boardroom. 2 venture capitalists instantly stood up, their faces pale with shock and rising fury. Chloe shrank back into her leather chair, her smug smile replaced by a look of sheer, white-knuckled terror. "Turn it off." Arthur shrieked, lunging toward the console, his composure entirely destroyed. "She's lying. These are fabricated. She's a bitter, hysterical housewife trying to ruin me." "I am not a housewife, Arthur," I said, stepping directly into his path, forcing him to stop or physically collide with me. I looked up into his sweating, panicked face. "I am the auditor, and the math never lies." The atmosphere in the boardroom was electric with catastrophic realization. The investors, staring at the irrefutable evidence of stolen millions projected 30 feet high across the wall, were no longer looking at Arthur with the reverence reserved for a visionary. They were looking at him with the absolute, visceral disgust reserved for a thief who had been caught with his hands deep inside their pockets. Arthur's chest was heaving. He looked wildly around the room, desperate to find a single sympathetic face, but he was met with nothing but stony silence and outright hostility. He had spent years cultivating his image as a self-made titan, but the screen behind him laid bare the pathetic, grasping reality of his fraud. "Arthur, is this true?" demanded Richard, the lead representative of our largest venture capital firm. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Did you funnel $16 million of operational capital to buy a beach house for your marketing director?" "No, Richard, listen to me, it's a setup." Arthur pleaded, his voice reaching a shrill, undignified pitch. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She hacked my accounts. She manufactured these transfers to force a divorce settlement. She has no proof." "I have the digital footprint of every single keystroke," I corrected smoothly, my voice slicing through his panic. "And the federal authorities will have the complete, unredacted drive by 5 o'clock this evening." I turned away from his trembling figure and signaled my lead litigator, who stepped forward and dropped a massive, heavy, red-tabbed binder directly into the center of the mahogany table. The dull thud echoed like a gavel strike. "But the embezzlement is only the secondary agenda item for today's meeting," I announced, projecting my voice to the far end of the room. Arthur Vance has continually represented himself to this board, and to the public as the founder, sole owner, and majority shareholder of Apex Logistics. Arthur froze, a new, entirely different kind of terror dawning in his eyes. He stared at the red-tabbed binder, his mind racing backward 30 years, trying to remember the paperwork he had gladly ignored when we were starving in a freezing garage. "However," I continued, unlatching the binder and opening it to the yellowed, original articles of incorporation. "When this company was founded, Arthur possessed a credit score that disqualified him from holding a basic checking account, let alone securing commercial loans. To protect the entity from his personal creditors, the master holding company, Crestview Holdings, was registered exclusively to me." I slid the original, notarized documents down the table toward Richard. "Furthermore," I said, the absolute weight of my victory finally crystallizing in the air, "the patents for the proprietary routing algorithms, the trademarks, and the core operational software are all owned solely by Crestview. Apex Logistics is merely a subsidiary operating under a licensing agreement, an agreement that I, as the sole legal owner of the holding company, am terminating right now." Arthur stumbled backward, his hip crashing into the edge of the table. The blood drained so completely from his face he looked as though he might pass out. No, Claire, you can't do this. We're married. It's community property. The holding company predates our marriage by 6 months, my attorney interjected, his voice dripping with legal finality. And the capital used to establish it was drawn from Ms. Vance's premarital savings. You have absolutely no equity claim, Mr. Vance. You do not own this company. You are simply an at-will employee. And you are fired, I said, looking directly into his eyes. Effective immediately, for criminal fraud, fiduciary breach, and gross misconduct. Your corporate credit cards have already been deactivated, and my legal team has filed injunctions freezing your personal accounts to begin recovering the stolen assets. Arthur was entirely broken. He looked at the legal binder, he looked at the hostile board, and then he turned his desperate, tear-filled eyes toward Chloe. Chloe, he choked out, reaching a hand toward her. Chloe, call the real estate lawyers. We can leverage the Carmel property. We can fight this. Chloe, realizing with terrifying clarity that the man she had attached herself to was no longer a billionaire CEO, but a bankrupt, soon-to-be federal inmate, practically leaped out of her chair. Don't talk to me, she shrieked, backing away from him as if he were covered in flames. The smug, proprietary mistress was gone, replaced by a terrified opportunist looking for an exit. She turned to the board, her hands raised defensively. I didn't know anything about the stolen money. He told me it was from his personal trust. I am a victim here. I'm resigning immediately. Without waiting for a response, Chloe grabbed her designer handbag, pushed past Arthur, and sprinted for the boardroom doors, fleeing the building with breathtaking speed. She abandoned him the precise second the bank account hit zero. Arthur let out a hollow, devastated sob. He was completely alone, trapped in a room full of people who were actively drafting lawsuits against him. Security, I said calmly, looking at the 2 massive guards who had been waiting quietly in the hallway. Please escort Mr. Vance off my property. He is not to take anything but the suit on his back. Arthur didn't fight. He didn't scream or curse. His legs simply gave out. The guards grabbed him by the elbows, hauling his dead weight up and dragging him backward. As he was pulled out of the boardroom, the golden boy of logistics wept openly, stripped of his empire, his mistress, and his dignity in less than 10 minutes. I turned back to the stunned, silent board. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the chair I had built for him, and sat down. Now, I said, opening a fresh file folder. Let's discuss how we are going to fix the supply chain. The purge of Arthur's toxic influence was executed with the kind of ruthless efficiency I had applied to our ledgers for 30 years. Once the ego and the reckless spending were removed from the equation, Apex Logistics didn't just stabilize, it thrived. The board of directors, initially terrified by the boardroom bloodbath, quickly realized that the woman sitting at the head of the table was vastly superior to the man they had idolized. I streamlined the national routes, cut the bloated marketing budgets Arthur had used to fund his mistress, and drove the company's valuation to unprecedented global heights within a single fiscal year. The divorce was profoundly one-sided. Facing an ironclad federal indictment for the embezzlement, Arthur was forced to sign a settlement agreement entirely dictated by my lawyers. He surrendered his claim to the suburban estate, handed over the keys to the luxury cars, and agreed to crippling restitution payments just to avoid a maximum security prison sentence. The beach house in Carmel was seized, liquidated, and the funds were returned to the investor pool. Chloe, realizing she would be implicated in the fraud if she fought for the property, vanished into obscurity, her reputation in the corporate world permanently ruined. For the first time in 3 decades, my brilliance was no longer acting as invisible scaffolding. I moved out of the stifling suburban house and purchased a breathtaking, ultra-modern penthouse downtown, just blocks from my corporate headquarters. I surrounded myself with fierce, intelligent peers who respected my strategic mind, rather than men who wanted me to fetch their coffee. I had spent my entire adult life building a pedestal for someone else. Now, I was firmly seated on a throne of my own making, and the view was spectacular. 10 months after I had Arthur escorted from the building, I was leaving a luxury steakhouse following a celebratory dinner with international investors. The evening air was brisk, the city lights reflecting off the polished black hood of my waiting car. As my driver opened the rear door for me, a figure stepped out from the shadows near the service entrance of the restaurant. It was Arthur. He was wearing a faded, low-end courier uniform, a heavy delivery bag slung over one shoulder. The bespoke suits and the radiant, confident aura were completely gone. He looked aged, his face deeply lined with the exhaustion of a man working minimum wage to pay off millions in legal debt. He was a shell, hollowed out by his own greed. He saw me, the immaculate designer coat, the waiting town car, the unmistakable glow of a woman who had won the war. His eyes filled with a pathetic, agonizing mixture of regret and desperate hope. "Claire," he croaked, stepping forward, his hand trembling as he reached out toward me. "Claire, please, just 1 minute, I have nothing. I can barely afford to eat. I was so stupid. Please, we built a life together. You have to help me." He was waiting for the woman he had known for 30 years. The woman who had sacrificed her youth, fixed his mistakes, and quietly absorbed his failures to keep him afloat. He wanted me to save him just one more time. I looked at him. I searched my heart for pity, for anger, or for the residual warmth of a 3-decade marriage. I found absolutely nothing. He was no longer the love of my life, nor was he my greatest enemy. He was just a stranger holding a box. I didn't smile and I didn't scowl. I offered him a blank, chilling look of absolute indifference, stepped into the back of my car, and closed the door. I didn't look back as we drove away. A valuable lesson for the listener. If there is one profound, echoing truth to take away from Claire's journey, it is this: never let your brilliance become the invisible scaffolding for someone else's ego. For 30 years, Claire defined her worth by her utility. She believed that true love meant sacrificing her own spotlight to build a foundation for her partner, assuming that her loyalty would eventually be rewarded with lifelong security. But when you build a foundation for someone who only loves the view, they will eventually try to push you off the ledge so they don't have to share the balcony. Society often conditions us to believe that the greatest expression of devotion is self-erasure. We are told to quietly manage our partner's insecurities, do the heavy lifting in the shadows, and let them take the credit to keep the peace. But a parasite does not respect the host that feeds it. It simply grows entitled to the blood. True empowerment does not mean waiting for someone to acknowledge your sacrifices. It means recognizing your own undeniable worth, refusing to be a stepping stone, and having the absolute courage to tear down the people who try to exploit your generosity. Do not let your hard work fund someone else's arrogance. Reclaim your assets, step out of the shadows, and remember that the person strong enough to build the empire is always the one who truly deserves to rule it.